Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Arboricultural Association Wednesday webinar sponsored by Still. My name's John Parker, CEO at the association, and your host for this evening. Please don't adjust your set. You are not watching a 1970s webinar. I'm just dressing up nice, or dressing up somehow, I'm not sure. But anyway. I've got a dog here as well, for when you ask. The dog is sat right here. He's just not performing at the moment. Please say hello in the chat. Many of you already have. Let us know where you're watching from and use the Q&A button for any questions you might have. If your question is targeted at a specific speaker, as we've got quite a few speakers this evening, please do say who you're asking the question to. Tonight, we'll be learning about managing veteran fruit trees with Helen Read, Reg Harris, Martin Hayes, Simeon Day, and Steve Oram. Over to all of that in just a minute. But first, next week, there is no webinar. This is the last one of the series. I know, I'm sorry. But what a fantastic little run we have had. It's been about 7,000 live viewers from all over the world, even though Reg has just admitted that he's one of the people who claims to be in Azerbaijan or Antarctica every week. But lots of people watching from all over the world, real ones, not just Reg, plus thousands of views on YouTube. We've had dozens of countries. We've had an awful lot of great speakers. So I will take this opportunity to say thank you to Jim Mulholland, Ted Green, Jeremy Barrell, Heather Craddock, Maria Chiara Pastore, Cecilia Shavana Bryant, Nadina Galley, Justine Cast, Sai Gadari, Tony Kirkham, Chris Natman again, Maria Kennedy, Eva Bedenko, John Hartill, Francesca Hunger, Gustav Kettle, Ebba Delwick, Gerard Pasola, Helen Read, Reg Harris, Martin Hayes, Simeon Day, and Steve Oram, and also to Emma Gilmartin for presenting one webinar and expertly hosting another, and of course to Andrew for all of his work behind the scenes, as well as all of my other colleagues for everything they do to make the association work every single day. And thank you to Steel for sponsoring, and to all of you wonderful viewers, of course, without whom we would just be sat in a room talking to ourselves, which is what I'll be doing next Wednesday. If you're a member of the association, then thank you for your support. If you're not yet a member, then please do consider joining. These webinars are a great example of what we are all about: raising standards, promoting arboriculture, and building an international community of people who care for trees. And the more members we have, the more we can do, and the more influence we have. So please do think about it. Right, after all that, let's get down to business with the main event. I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker to the virtual stage. Helen, it is over to you.
Thank you, John, and good evening to everybody. We've got 5 of us speaking this evening, so we'll try and have a sort of seamless transition from one to another. Steve is going to be sharing his screen and showing the slides and moving them on for us. So, Steve, if you could maybe have a go at sharing your slides, please. So first of all, a bit of an introduction to us and Orchard Network and who we are. So if we could have the next slide, please, Steve. So Orchard Network is an umbrella organisation, and it consists of a wide range of different groups, including statutory organisations, groups such as horticultural groups like the National Collections, a whole host of regional apple groups. And I sit on Orchard Network as the link between Orchard Network and the Ancient Tree Forum. So the Orchard Network is coordinated by the People's Trust for Endangered Species, which is who Steve works for, and Steve provides the sort of secretariat for the organisation. It has a website and it organises various initiatives like Blossom Day, runs and promotes local groups, and probably the most relevant thing for some of you might be that there has been a series of free webinars about planting and managing orchards, and they're available on the website. So the seminar, as John has outlined, is about managing veteran fruit trees. And I think probably a sort of highlight all the way through the event will be that veteran fruit trees can be quite small and easily overlooked. But despite their small size, they're very important for both wildlife and heritage values. But one of the key things for us is that a lot of the standard arboricultural pruning doesn't seem to be very suitable for many fruit trees. And as we also know that veteran trees may require different techniques. So putting the two together, we felt that having some more information out there about veteran trees and veteran fruit trees and managing them seemed to be quite important. So management of younger fruit trees tends to be quite similar to veteran trees generally. So I shall now pass over to Steve, who's going to continue to talk a little bit about wildlife and legal issues to do with managing fruit trees.
Hello. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So in my role at PTS, I get involved with all sorts of elements of fruit trees and orchards, but our main focus is on wildlife, as PTS are a wildlife charity. So what is it about old fruit trees that is so important for biodiversity? Essentially, the main thing is the decay and deadwood within the trees. So that's where a lot of our focus is on how we manage these orchards. So first of all, just a quick rundown of what is a traditional orchard. Traditional orchard is possibly not the best name for it. A better name might be an unsprayed orchard, because that sort of defines it. It really sort of like makes the difference between a modern intensive orchard and one that is managed in another way. And there's a whole spectrum of different types of traditional orchard, and ones in the West Country will be very different from those in the East, and then again those that can be found in other parts of, in particular in Europe, are again very different to the ones that we have over here. And so essentially it's about the structure. There's space in between the trees, and they're generally all of the Rosaceae family trees and nut trees as well. They're always grafted, because you're looking for a variety which gets propagated by grafting. And ideally they're pruned, not always, but normally they are pruned to keep the trees open to the open canopy for the light to get through the trees. And again, at the bottom there, the most important thing is they are unsprayed, and that allows the ecology to evolve rather than being sprayed off each time. So there's a series of various different types of orchard there, from like quite young ones to espaliers, which can also go for decades, and ones which have completely hollowed out trees, and a very old one up in the right hand corner there that is it's a very small tree, and it's probably pretty old and got hollow in, but look at that crop, it's fantastic. We're also sort of like really interested in all the different varieties that we get, and we do a lot of work identifying old varieties and making sure that they're still being planted in orchards throughout the country, because they're the future of our orchards, and without all of the different types of varieties and local varieties and interest, it really denudes the value of traditional orchards generally. So what is it that creates this important habitat? So if you imagine you've got a field on as A and a woodland as B, there's going to be a species which dominates in each of these habitats. But where they meet, you get this ecotone, an edge effect, which most people will be familiar with. And even though we don't get sort of like the biggest bulk of species in there, you get the most variation of species, because neither A nor B can be dominant. So that leaves space for C, D, E, and F. And that's the edge effect, which you can see throughout an orchard, because effectively what we're creating in an orchard is one continuous ecotone. So in this example, there's a lovely orchard there with great trees in there, but it's got open spaces in between the trees. We've got a woodland edge, where it transitions into the orchard. And then we have a hedgerow is always a feature of most orchards, because they need the wind to be broken to create that microclimate that's good for fruit production. And they're fantastic habitats in their own right, where you get a transition from open field into partially shaded sward. You have pathways which are trampled through the orchards. It could be through mechanical means, or people walking through the orchard, pickers, pruners and workers, or also animals where they have their own pathways through spaces. And then you have the sward, which is sometimes very biodiverse in terms of species. But the most important thing about the sward is what's underneath it hasn't been ploughed. It's an amazing carbon sink, and you get the soil structure builds up because obviously you're not going to plough in an orchard. So in summary, it's a mosaic habitat with lots of different features. It has both living trees and decaying wood within it. And this is an example of an ancient Bramley with lots of what we call frass, which is the droppings of the noble chafer. Noble chafer is a flagship species for traditional orchards, and that's a close-up version of the picture of their pellets, which is what they produce. And when you find those, they're very distinctive, so you know you found the noble chafer, even if you're unlikely to actually find the chafer itself. They're defined as a semi-natural, unimproved grassland underneath them. As I said, the soil disturbance is minimal. They're not sprayed. There's lots of forage. It's not just when the trees are in blossom, which is obviously an important one, but you've got to sustain those insects, pollinators throughout the year. And there's going to be species living in the grass and the sward and in the hedgerows and the different trees in the surrounding area. So that's going to keep those pollinators alive throughout the season. Then, of course, you've got the fruit, most important thing, which is not just for people. We take a harvest, but there's also a tithe will be taken by nature. Some will be lost to various bugs and birds, and so that is another source of food. In terms of habitat, they are considered as a stepping stone habitat. Outside of the main areas where fruit trees are grown, such as in the 3 counties in Worcestershire, Herefordshire, Gloucestershire, they're fairly well distributed throughout the country. So these stepping stone habitats are quite well dispersed throughout the landscape. And a really critical thing about good habitat is continuity. They've been there. Some of these orchards have been there for hundreds of years. And the longer a habitat is in situ, the more species it picks up along the way. And that's one of the great things about orchards, is that by definition they have to be there for a long time. Briefly about the legal considerations, most people will be aware of tree preservation orders. You have to check before you do work on a tree if you think it may be protected, because you may be liable for fines. There are caveats if public safety is, of course, an important thing. There is no longer what was called the fruit tree exemption. When TPOs were first created, they could be just removed willy-nilly. It was quite a long time ago that was removed. But there is an exemption with fruit trees for pruning in line with good horticultural practice. The NERC Act is where a lot of our biodiversity legislation begins. It places this duty to conserve biodiversity on the public authorities, and that is translated into other legislation, such as an environmental impact assessment, which is where if you're changing the use of agricultural land, and the NPPF, which is to do with planning and development. And of these things that I've already mentioned, you have stepping stone habitats, wildlife rich habitats. But the really critical one here is paragraph 193C, which is mentions irreplaceable habitats such as veteran trees. So fruit trees are generally not ancient because they don't get old enough to be ancient. They are a really important habitat because they have very short lives in terms of trees. The only other place you will find a decaying wood habitat similar to an orchard is in a wood pasture in parkland, its full name. But you're typically looking at oak trees in these habitats, which take 300 or 400 years to get to this really highly biodiverse habitat with saproxylic species, which are the rarest of all sort of groups of species. Just because this particular habitat, this dry, standing, protected, dead and decaying wood habitat is so uncommon. And you would probably have heard of the biodiversity net gain, which is all fairly new. But one of the really great things about the BNG is the fact that part of the Environment Act, which has introduced all of the biodiversity net gain, has included this Schedule 7A, which says that any damage which is done to a habitat which lowers its biodiversity value has to be considered as having not been done if it was done after the cut-off line of January 30th, 2020. So if someone comes in and flattens an orchard or any other habitat, when it comes to be assessed for that planning application, it will be assessed as if it is still in place. And for us, that's quite an important provision, because it reduces the chances that people just go in and flatten something whilst no one's looking. At which point, I will hand over to Martin Hayes to talk about
Thank you very much, Steve.
tree management. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you. This section is talking about rootstocks, and there's a whole load of different type rootstocks. Dwarfing rootstocks, they include semi-dwarfing, dwarfing, and very dwarfing. And although they have a place in biodiversity, they're not what we're talking about now. We're talking about the vigorous rootstocks. And the main two of those are vigorous and very vigorous. And these are the sort of rootstocks you will get in traditional orchards. And that's a lovely diagram there of the rootstocks. The reason why in traditional orchards, when we plant these big rootstocks, is mainly for their ecological value. And Steve talked about all the dead and decaying wood in the tree, sap runs, all sorts of things. There's so much life living in the tree. And that's why we generally use these big rootstocks, because they have a longevity. They can last for over 100 years plus. Perry pears, for instance, they can last for 300 years. So, you know, they have got quite longevity. And even when they're decaying and branches are falling off, and they're still got a lot of value in there a long time after they've passed away, with standing dead wood and the like. And that's why we like to leave those sort of things in the orchard. So good ecological value. One of the problems with the vigorous rootstocks is the fact that you get rootstock dominance. And if we don't keep on top of this, it can be very detrimental to the tree. And I was at an orchard today where a pear on a rootstock had been taken over by the roots, and the tree itself had died, and it was just left with this massive. It still had a good value, but it hadn't got the crop that we wanted. So it's very important to keep the rootstocks down, because they can be quite more vigorous than the actual variety that you've got on the tree. In terms of pruning your fruit trees early on, there are a few different types of shapes then that you might come across. Steve mentioned the goblet shape. There's the open center shape, and that's a lovely diagram there of a central leader. And I always go for the central leader shape when I planted a tree early on, because that can give you much more control over what happens beneath the tree, you know, and the branches, formulating the branches, which is a really important part of early pruning. The central leader can be taken out in years' time, in a number of years' time, to produce the nice shaped tree, which you see on the right of the picture there. Generally, the vigorous rootstocks we use, they can be pruned to what is known as a half standard and a full standard. And that basically is where the first branches start. So the first furl of branches, you can have a half standard. And in my neck of the woods in Gloucestershire, and as Steve said, it's different in different places. We start our branches on a half standard at 5'6", and basically that is to run sheep underneath. Full standard is 7'6", and it's very important not to get too embroiled in them terminologies. The most important thing is the rootstock that you're using, and you will find that most of the grant schemes, especially with Natural England, they want these big, vigorous rootstocks because they have got that longevity value, as I said. And so, whilst pruning the rootstock, the trees, obviously you've got to protect them against when they're young, against various predators that will eat your bark. Sheep, livestock, obviously sheep, cattle, and we put weld mesh around the base, and then we shall cut the branches. We're not really too bothered about the lower branches. They can poke through the weld mesh because eventually we'll be taking them off because we want them to start at that 5'6" or 7'6", which depending on what your livestock you're using. So yes, we're sort of pruning the trees when they're young. We're getting rid of the suckers, so that the tree, also the suckers take a lot of energy from the tree as well, and we don't want that. So we're pruning the tree, opening up or using that central leader, creating layers, in fact, creating layers of branches for, and the way we're cutting it and keeping it compact so that it's not going to start growing too far out and getting very, very lopsided and unstable. The other things to remember, apart from the livestock, we have deer problems, we have badgers, and in the Forest of Dean they have boar, and all these things want to eat your tree. So it's very important, I mean, the trees are young, to protect them against rabbits with rabbit guards. People use biodegradable rabbit guards. You can get woolen ones as well. Now they think they've just come on the market, which is quite a fascinating thing. And we're up against it all the time with these young trees. Once they get to a certain age and we can take the guards off, we just then need to protect the trunk, because when it snows and the animals can't get the grass that they need, they start to attack your tree. And we've had quite a lot of problems with predators like that in some of the orchards when the snows have been in Gloucestershire. Quite serious damage. So, and I've got something else on the next page. Choosing your varieties is quite important. Obviously, you know, we want to try and keep as many heritage varieties going as we can, local to the area. We do have a percentage of more planting of more commercial varieties, you know, such as Coxes and Discoveries and that. And you can get them on vigorous rootstocks, and it's quite nice to put a few of them in because we know them, we know they're good, we know kids like them, and we're up against Pink Lady these days, so we have to have some really good, tasty varieties, Gloucestershire or local varieties to your area. Bramleys are the beast of any orchard. And they are a particularly vigorous growing apple tree, need a lot of space. And with vigorous trees, we plant them between 8 and 10 meters apart in what is called a quincunx position system. And it's quin, as in 5, and cunx, C-U-N-X, sorry to disappoint. And it's like a chessboard. If you think of a chessboard, and if you imagine that the black pieces on the chessboard are the tree and the white bits are the blank spaces, that's the shape we're doing. That's a traditional shape for a tree. You do sometimes get them in lines, but more often than not in traditional orchards, we get them in that pattern. I think I've covered most of the things there. Obviously, there'll be some question and answers after. And so if Simeon's ready, I'll pass over to you.
Hi, thank you very much, Martin, Steve, Helen. So now this is my section, and I'm going to be building on what the other three panelists have been raising. So I'm Simeon Day. I work for the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. I'm an orchard specialist covering the southwest of England. And I think what's really important is we've set the outline of how important orchards are and veteran trees are. But I think what's really essential for when we're actually going to be carrying out work in there is about understanding what your orchard and your trees actually need. And so that's kind of what I'm going to cover in this presentation now. So Steve, if you could click on the next slide, please. Brilliant. So really, before you actually start doing anything in your orchard, you really need to get a good idea of what's kind of going on in there and to really come up with a plan of what you're going to do. So, Steve, you can a couple of clicks, please. The most important thing you can do is to identify the type of orchard and its tree shape, but also to actually assess the tree itself. So you need to see that whole kind of space where it's actually in, and also the actual individual. Get to know that individual tree and find out what it actually needs. So what I'm going to do now is actually just run through a few different kind of orchard types, typical orchard types, just to give you an idea of what that assessment process should be. So Steve, click please. Thank you. So basically the orchard design and the tree shape is driven by the crop and the product that is required. And most importantly, from that product is its method of harvesting as well. So if you could do a couple of clicks, please, Steve. So it's really important to identify the aim of that orchard management and therefore the type of the pruning which is required. So this is an example of the smallest dwarfing roots. So I just think some people are saying it's a bit muffled. Is that a bit clearer? Is that any better? So looking at it, it's a bush kind of orchard, intensively managed, and it's actually pruned so there's multiple stems lower down, but easy picking by hand. It's very commercial, lots of pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, and so on. Intensive pruning and lots of trees within that space. And again, that tree shape you're looking at is a bush shape. Now, it's highly unlikely you're going to find a traditional veteran fruit tree in that space because they're all young, highly productive trees. Next slide, please, Steve. So next, we're looking at a commercial kind of orchard where it could potentially like juice and cider. And so this is kind of like a commercial fruit wall type of design. It's grown on vigorous and semi-vigorous rootstocks. It's usually 3 meter spacings between the stems and 6 meters apart, so they're harvested by machine. 400 to 600 trees kind of like per hectare. But the interesting thing about this is that you're looking at the tree shape, and as Martin kind of spoke about, these are actually centre leader. So you can see how they are actually going straight up in the middle, a central kind of stem with a series of branches coming out from there. Where if you look down it, it's almost like this bicycle, the spokes of a bicycle wheel, where they're actually evenly spread out, and there's no shading and that kind of thing. And so that's that kind of tree, the tree shape of that centre leader. And again, these are managed on a very big scale, and again, a very good habitat and useful for wildlife, but they are, again, unlikely to have any veteran trees in there. Next slide, please, Steve. And so this is where we really start coming into traditional orchards, and we've had a good outline of what they are now up to this point. But these are absolutely fantastic. So these are the really old, less intensively managed, often unsprayed, as Steve was saying. The branches, it's pruned, so the branches are actually above the reach of the grazing animals, which is sheep or most often cattle. We'll talk about goats later. But they're all on vigorous standard rootstocks, 8 to 10 meter spacings, very long-lived trees. So we're talking about apple trees with 75 to 100 years, and pear trees, as Martin was saying, 200 years plus. And again, at low density, so we're talking about, let's say, 8 to 10 meter spacing, you get about 100 to 150 trees per hectare. And often, and most likely, because again, the traditional approach that was taken, the tree shape is often a goblet. You can get centre-leaded as well in amongst those, but quite often they are, certainly in the West Country, they're goblet shapes, wine glass shapes. You have that open centre with that structure of branches coming away from that. Often they're harvested by collecting them off the floor or tree shaking as well. So next slide, please. And it's in these kind of orchards where you are going to find veteran fruit trees. And so this is the example of a veteran fruit tree, which basically this is an orchard in Devon, and it's been owned by the same family since the Crusades, which is kind of like about 1300. And I think I was probably the first one to have gone into that orchard since that time. It was completely neglected, completely, all the trees were kind of overgrown. And you can see here, if ever there was a tree that required some restorative pruning, it's this one. So it's very dense, congested, low-hanging branches, and the shape isn't going to be ideal for that kind of longevity. So the point of restorative pruning is to restore and rejuvenate neglected fruit trees. The whole key to this idea is about longevity. That pruning to keep the tree for as healthy for as long as possible, and giving it that time so that veteranization can occur and can create all those features is really, really important for wildlife. A click, please, Steve. And so what you need to do with this is to kind of really prune to create that open canopy like we saw in the previous photo, allowing light and air to circulate. You're taking down humidity so that you're helping to reduce fungal infection to an extent, and allowing that kind of light and air to circulate, so it's kind of keeping it really, really healthy inside. So what we're looking at is removing diseased and damaged tree branches rather, and crossing branches as well. So where you've got two branches crossing each other, they can then create an open wound, and that's where it's infection, and particularly canker, which is the disease we're really concerned about actually getting in there and actually damaging the tree. And also to thin overcrowded and congestion. I mean, and you can see here if this tree really, really does need that kind of work. So that's the kind of approach, that's the kind of thought, the principle that we're going to try and talk about. The next clip, please, Steve. So not only are we opening up the light and the centre, the centre for the light and the air to circulate, we're also looking at maintaining the balance of the tree as well. So about removing those long, inappropriately positioned limbs with that potential to cause splitting. So this example here, it's in the same orchard, and you can see there's a branch has already split out historically. So you've actually got that wound down that stem, but it has kind of calloused over and healed. But that branch coming off is actually not a limb which is actually fallen down. It is actually growing out at that angle. So that's really another highly potential branch of the damage that we actually need to remove. Or certainly kind of a balance to kind of give that longevity and lifespan to the tree. Next click, please. Sorry. Thank you. So again, we're talking about maintaining that open framework of strong branches and encouraging that new growth. They are still very vigorous. They still want to grow. And so it's really important to kind of giving them that opportunity to grow while they're keeping some of the veteran features and that strong framework so they can stand up. Next one, please. And also it's about managing the overall size and shape. So kind of to correct any kind of like unbalancedness and any kind of leaning, that kind of top-heavy and lopsided trees, because they can actually cause that potential to blow over. So you see on this tree here, it's got a real kind of like lean, and it's getting towards a kind of a veteran, not quite kind of there, it's relatively young, so it's got time to kind of like grow and rebalance itself, but it has got that really long growth on the left-hand side. So you need to consider about removing that, because if that gets fully laden with crop, it actually take it over quite a lot. And cause that potential for wind blow. But if you reduce that and actually do some pruning on that other side to stimulate new growth to help it kind of create that balance so it can cope with the storms which we're now increasingly experiencing. Next clip, please. So diseased wood or decaying and dead wood, it's really important for us to kind of really work out what that difference is, because you can see here, so these are some really old veteran trees that have got some amazing features on them. There's kind of significant stem hollowing. You can see here all the saprophytic insects are in there, eating away, having a lovely time. It's a perfect kind of habitat for them. Within that, hollowing on the right-hand side as well, on that photo on the right-hand side, you've got jackdaws nests in there, there's coal-tip nests and all sorts of things. As we said before, they're so invaluable. But the thing is, if we were to prune out all of the diseased wood, then we wouldn't actually get any of those veteran features. So it's actually really important to see the difference. And basically, we're talking really about canker. It's really important to kind of to remove those things, the branches which are affected by that canker. Whereas there are other kind of fungal pathogens and so on, which can actually help create those veteran features by causing that stem hollowing. So it's really, you really need to kind of get into your head about the difference between what is diseased wood, which is an active and reinfecting piece of wood, which can cause future damage, but also shortening its life, compared to the decaying and dead wood, which is so important. And they're the kind of features we really need to kind of encourage and also look after at the same time. Next slide, please. So another thing is mistletoe. So there's certain areas within certainly the southwest where this is a problem, and so it's really important to. I think we've probably had whole webinars actually on this subject itself. So, but it's really important to keep an eye on that. In most orchards, there is an element of mistletoe, which is fine, but it can actually get to its kind of really invasive. Essentially, it's kind of taking over the actual apple tree, where the tree actually thinks it's kind of growing, but it's actually putting all the energy into the mistletoe. So it's really important at that point to kind of manage that. We call it the mistletoe burden. It's really important to keep an eye on that and manage it so it doesn't actually take over the tree. I've been into orchards where there's more mistletoe than tree, and it really is compromising the future of that tree and the health for long term. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we're all talking about longevity, and this is the kind of thing that we want to ensure, because you can see from this background photo, it's a view over an amazing orchard, just moving into kind of veteran stage, about 40 to kind of 50 years, starting to develop some features, still highly productive. Looking at the view of Glastonbury Tor in Somerset in the southwest of England. But Steve, you could click the video, please. Trees want to grow, and they still have significant vigor in them, even when they're actually old. And you see here, this tree has even got some mistletoe in it, lovely fresh leaves, but that's all that's left of it. So it's a really, really fantastic habitat, and it's about that longevity in keeping them going. So Steve, if you can do a few clicks as we go through, please. So I just want to run through again just the key principles of restorative pruning. And again, another click, please, thank you, and then just keep clicking, that's fine. So firstly, it's really important to assess the tree, walk all the way around it, have a really, really good look. And then what you need to do, decide what pruning is required in total to restore that tree. Once you've got that, then you want to divide that total over 3 to 5 years, where you're only pruning about 20% of that total amount. And also what's really important is give the tree a rest. Rather than doing it in years 1, 2, 3, they may do year 1, see how it responds, then year 3, and then maybe year 5. But it's really important to get to know it, don't rush it, and work with it. And identify what's best for it. Because over pruning in 1 year can shock and stress the tree. Steve, if you can do a couple of clicks, please. Because then what happens, you get hedgehog pruning. Sorry, actually, can you pop back one, please, Steve? Sorry, I do apologise for that. So basically, you can see here what's happened is that the client actually wanted, here we go, thank you. The client actually wanted all the height of the tree reduced. So someone's come in and actually just lopped the top off and lots of kind of big cuts. And what's happened is it's this plethora, this huge burst of water shoots have actually come up, which has basically ruined the whole structure. You can see some of the trees in the background. There's about 6 which they didn't get to, but about 25 that they did. And you see others on the left-hand side as well. So if you can do another click, please, Steve. So then what happens, we're actually looking at it stimulates that vigorous growth. They still kind of really want to grow. And so you see some rather large cuts and it's just gone into a hedgehog. And that's exactly what we don't really want. And that's what can actually really then shock that tree. So click, please, Steve. So what we've developed is actually a pruning assessment guidance. And so it actually helps formulate your ideas, get a plan for what you're going to do in that orchard, and identify the difference between maintenance pruning and restorative pruning. The maintenance pruning is that pruning where you're kind of managing the amount of vegetative growth, amount of branch growth and fruit production, and it's a regular kind of activity. And restorative pruning is really kind of working with that neglected fruit trees and bringing them back into a cycle of maintenance pruning. So this is a good way of being able to. We're actually we deliver some work for government to actually do some assessments, and this is the kind of process we actually use for that. So that's why we look at each individual tree and identify if there's limited new growth, the amount of dieback, and dead and decaying wood, and the main amount of diseased wood. So again, they're kind of looking at those kind of differences of the different types of diseased wood and dead wood, and then broken damaged limbs, crossing limbs, overcrowding, percentage of canopy, giving you a good idea. Look at the unbalanced growth, overall size and shape, and the burden of mistletoe. And then this basically will throw out the answer of whether it's actually needs maintenance pruning or restorative pruning. So, and then by having an aerial photo or some kind of map of your orchard, it's really important and it's great to be able to walk through and you can see, you can identify symbols to make it clear kind of what ones need different types of pruning, and it can really help steer how you're going to apply for grants or take on the management of that orchard. Okay, so that's good. I've gone through the trees, assessing the trees, and also we're going to moving into that assessing the orchard. Steve, we can have another click, please. It's really important. Now we've got to know our tree. It's an individual. We've really got to know its needs and what needs to happen. But we should not view the tree in isolation. It's really important to look at what's around it, consider the orchard as a whole, and and identify the threats which could potentially be within that orchard, which are going to affect the longevity and the viability of all of our veteran trees. So if you have another click, please. So here, shading and other trees and hedges. I mean, I actually do really, really love this tree. It's kind of a really kind of artistic, funky kind of shape, which is great. But basically what it's displaying is that kind of uniform stress where it's trying to kind of balance itself. It's got very close planting between other trees. It's got a very large tree just above our heads, leaning over and shading it. It's kind of driving for that light. So it looks great, but you just need to consider how that all kind of all works. And also, if you've got hedges are brilliant for orchards. They can help provide a habitat throughout the year for pollinators, which is what we really want when the blossom is out in an orchard. But also they can reduce wind flow, which can then increase humidity, increase the likelihood of fungal attack. And also I've seen them where they can spread right into the orchard. You can see here on the right-hand side, where it really is entering into the orchard and causing problems and overcrowding the trees. Next slide, please. Now, trust me, there is a tree under here. I think this is amazing. It shows the resilience of apple trees. So here it's being completely smothered by brambles and climbers. If any tree needs a bit of help, and you can see there's still some apples. It's still fruiting, little red dots there. It's completely covered in climbers and brambles, and it's also got a big dose of mistletoe. So it's really important to see what other threats and impacts can happen from the other growth within the orchard. Next slide, please. And again, you can see here the sward and the scrub growth. It's really great to have a diverse sward, different lengths of grass. That's all really important for invertebrates, and also some scrub as well. Little patches, if you can allow some patches to grow in the corner, that's all really good for pollinators and everything else as well, and habitat and nesting, which is great. But you don't want to get it to a point where it's actually been dominated. And also you want to have more of a mosaic approach to the sward within that orchard. Next slide, please. And then kind of finally moving on to guard failure and stock damage. That's one of the key threats and damage which can occur within a orchard, traditional orchard, because you are grazing it, and that's the purpose of it, with that multifunctional space where you're getting a crop and also you're raising your stock as well. But where I've seen where the guard collapses, so the stock can then get there and strip the bark, scratch itself on the actual stem. You get compaction around the base, because again they're kind of trying to get shade and shelter from the sun and the storms, and so they actually have increased dunging and increased compaction around the base. So it's really important to have those kind of those guards on there, but also they can keep an important eye on those guards, because even the guards can actually cause rubbing and bark damage if they're particularly close and kind of like windy. Another click, please, Steve. But even when you've got a good functioning guard, which is brilliant, it all depends upon the stock. So this is where we come onto the goats, as I mentioned earlier. So this is an example of where there is a functioning guard, and where the sheep have been in there, it's like no problem at all. And they've even actually got some plastic mesh on the lower half, so that sheep can't go there and actually eat the bark, which they will do. But this area has actually been grazed by goats, so they've actually climbed up on the guard. They can't get down below because there's the mesh on there, but they've eaten literally everything all the way up to the total reach point, which I can't think is kind of like at least like 2 to 3 meters, because they can, well, essentially in Morocco they climb trees, so there's kind of a unlimited reach there, and they completely stripped it. So this is going to, and again, an interesting issue on this tree as well is there's also a power line running through there as well, so it's actually been quite hard pruned on that side, so you can see these water shoots being produced. Okay, so next click, please, Steve. So, the key thing is you've got all these threats, all these worries, all this kind of management, but don't forget the benefits. The trees are completely amazing, and these cows, they love being in amongst orchards. They're really great for young stock, unhealthy or medical cattle that need medical environment for them to kind of get much better in and healthier, and because they've got different types of grasses and that kind of stuff in there, they can eat the crop, keep an eye on them and everything else as well. And so yeah, it's a really, really good, important place for all of on the farm. So this last slide, please, Steve. So this is just something which has been supplied to our by Natural England. They're kind of an organisation which and government related arm's length body, which kind of helps advise on managing vegetarian trees and orchards. And this is their funding options here. So through the UK, English government schemes, you can actually get paid money to actually manage your traditional orchard. The grant scheme to really help you both create them, which is like £471 per year per hectare, and again to actually manage them, which is £264 per hectare per year. They're 10-year agreements, but also you can actually manage traditional orchards as well, kind of same price, and that's for a 3-year agreement. So that's you actually get support and help and guidance and advice on how to kind of like manage them, and also some financial support for them as well. But there's an additional payment which you can get for pruning to restore veteran fruit trees. And again, here it's all about restorative pruning to kind of help prolong their life and retain attached, standing and fallen dead wood. And you get paid £146 per tree for the lifetime of your agreement, which is 3 years. And so there is kind of government money out there to enable you to help look after your fruit trees and your orchards and help them be there for many future generations. So over to Reg now.
Thanks a lot, Simeon. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you for everyone for watching this. My name's Reg Harris. I'm an arborist from East Anglia, and for about the last 25 years of my career, I've been specialising in working with veteran and ancient trees. And why I have got interested in fruit as well is there seems to be some great crossovers between veteran and ancient trees, as well as veteran fruit trees, and some of the principles for pruning them are very similar. I can't start talking tonight without mentioning the guy you can see in the pictures here, and this is Orchard Bob. Orchard Bob has now retired, and it's a great pity that he can't really be talking tonight. And if you're watching, Bob, nice to see you. But he taught me an awful lot, and my fellow colleagues, about how to carry out restoration pruning of. If it was a veteran tree, you'd say it was like a lapsed pollard or a lapsed tree. But these are fruit trees that have ceased being pruned in cycle, and it's him that really taught me all these great techniques. And you can see him here on the right-hand side of the picture. Talking to the ATF, we had a visit to a traditional orchard in Wisbech, and he is a mine of information. But if you want to tap into some of that, Helen, after I've finished, is going to give you a few links because Orchard Bob created a vet tree video all about restoration pruning of these trees. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk tonight about the restoration sort of pruning aspect of it. That's where I come from. This is a tree from a traditional orchard in Girton College in Cambridge. And I just wanted to start off by saying restoration pruning is very, very different to conventional arboricultural crown reduction. And it's important to remember that, because the difference with a traditional conventional crown reduction is that you tend to prune the ends of the branches, and then you stimulate growth on the ends of the branches. Those branches can become loaded. Then you end up having to go back and prune them. It doesn't stimulate fruit, and it also misses out loads of the brilliant like habitat features in the tree. So please try not to prune that way. And also, before you start any work on a tree like this, it's really important to assess the tree properly, as Simeon has said. And one of the things that you can do to assess the tree is check its vitality. And by checking its vitality, you want to look at its leaves, see if they look normal size, if they're sort of glossy, if that's the type for the species. Look at extension growth. Also look at adaptive growth. So it's where it's put on adaptive growth, in particularly around wounds. So if it's occluding or healing over cuts, it's usually a good indicator that it has good vitality. So you don't want to be pruning veteran fruit trees if the vitality is poor. So as with veteran and ancient trees, another absolutely brilliant technique is do nothing. If you think the vitality is poor, or you think it won't respond after you've checked the vitality, you can do nothing. And in fact, Helen Read's dad, who is from Suffolk Traditional Orchard Group, and is kind of what Ted Green is to veteran and ancient trees, he is almost like the same, but to fruit. He has several hundred trees orchard over in East Anglia, and he doesn't prune his trees at all. So you don't always have to prune everything. But so some of the principles that I would use if I was going to prune this tree is, first of all, you want a succession of branches. You don't want just all one age group of branches. So if Steve could use the cursor and follow the trunk up. So from the trunk, you have what the Spanish call mother branches. And so these are the larger diameter branches. I've just recently been in Spain and was learning how to prune Quercus ilex trees that we would have normally called pollards. But when we were there, they taught us that the Quercus ilex trees there, they actually call them fruit trees because they're pruned almost identically to this in a way to stimulate acorns. And I think, John, it would make a brilliant webinar if our friend Juan Estrada in Spain could talk about how to prune trees to stimulate acorns. And the acorns are fed to the pigs. Amazing sort of to see, and also amazing to have a go at doing. But what I loved when I learned about those trees is that they talk about what we would perhaps call the scaffold branches. They call them the mother branches. So they are the underlying framework of branches. So you need to keep those. But then also, if Steve, if you could go back with your cursor, after that, you can see there are slightly smaller branches coming from these. That's it. Perfect. Thank you, Steve. And that's the next size. And then after that, we have much smaller, almost like epicormic shoots coming up, which throughout the crown. So you want a succession of these types of branches, so you don't all have one age. And then what we're looking to do is prune about 20% of the crown, as Simeon mentioned beforehand. And this is what Orchard Bob taught me, that because these are veteran trees, you don't want to be hitting them too hard. And I would advise that once you have pruned, and you haven't taken out more than 20% of the branches, that the following year you go back and have a look. And before you even think about any more pruning, again, you reassess its vitality, see how it's responded. And that can also be affected by things like the weather, especially if you've had a very, cold winter, droughty summer, etc. It can have a big effect. So some of the golden rules that we also use is that you're not when you take out these 20% of branches throughout the crown, you're definitely wanting to retain old and hollow branches because, as we know, they're full of tree soil. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But also, we're looking to retain dead wood. We're looking to retain that for saproxylic invertebrates. The cuts that you make, we're looking really to try and have branches that come off the mother branches at about 45-degree angle. Now, when I went to college many moons ago, I was told that when you prune a fruit tree and you take out the center, so you have this sort of goblet shape, you take out the central leaders, the dominant leaders, and I was told then, and I'm sure things might have changed, and I'd be very interested to hear if anyone knows this is the case still. But I was told that by taking out the central leader, it's affected by growth hormones, in particular something called indolacetic acid, and this is affected by gravity. So when it's going up the leader, if you cut the leader off, it then trickles down and it goes out to the lateral and side branches, and that's what stimulates flower and fruit. After that, if you pruned a tree like this, which I can show you another picture in a bit, you're looking to take out water shoots, and water shoots are those that come up looking for the light, and they're not really very productive for fruit. So when you do prune, you're looking for those big, fat, juicy, fruit buds, and you're taking out, if you can, 70% of the water shoots. We'd also looking to remove any leaders, tall, dominant leaders, looking to shorten overextending limbs. And again, as Simeon said, we're doing that because what we don't want to end up happening is long extended leaders that then, because these trees are old and fragile, we don't want to end up loading the ends of the branches, and especially because they become heavy with fruit. And it can cause, the failure of and loss, potentially catastrophic loss of branches. So that's basically it. It is really difficult to try and talk about this without actually physically showing you. And it's for me, it's something that is much easier to do in the field and when you're actually cutting and doing it like that. So could I have the next slide, please, Steve? So again, when you're pruning, we are wanting to retain habitat features. So you can see on the side, we've got Notus hispidus here, commonly found on apple trees. And you can see just beneath it where you've got sort of a wound occlusion and a little hollow. We're looking to always keep these. And you can see on the photograph on the right, again, where you've had a big tear out wound. And again, just like veteran and ancient trees, these are the features where we start to see, the saproxylic insects, invertebrates using. So it's that they're, these are little treasure troves of habitat. And I have heard that after wood pasture, traditional orchards are the next or the second most important for biodiversity after wood pasture. So these are really, really important trees. These are our arboricultural and cultural heritage, and they feed us as well. So amazing trees. Next slide, Steve, please. So another thing, as was mentioned before, retaining, if a branch breaks off, you don't necessarily need to go cleaning that cut up. We're trying to retain also the lichens. So if you're climbing in these trees, try not to scrape off lichens on your boots. And in fact, Orchard Bob used to do nearly all of his pruning from ground level, and he did it with a pole saw. I like to get in the crown of the tree because I feel I can make better cuts, some more accurate cuts. But there are downsides to that, because as you clamber around, you can be kicking off dead branches, or you can be disrupting what's lovely lichen like this. Okay, next slide, Steve. So when we were talking, one of the other speakers was talking earlier about whether veteran fruit trees can be ancient. I think this is myself. I think in proportion to its lifespan, it's right at its end of its lifespan, and so I would argue that this is actually an ancient fruit tree. And why it's important, just like the amazing ancient trees that we have around the UK that aren't fruit trees, nearly all of them are hollow, and it's boring to keep going on about it. But as Ted Green has done such a good job in schooling us, but hollow trees are really important, and it's really important that we retain them. And it's because in the middle of that trunk, it is a tree soil, and it's in that tree soil that we get all these different saproxylic insects in them. Some that are really, really rare, completely niche often to these sites, even sometimes just the actual site itself. So with a tree like this, I was taught that actually as trees become older and more hollow, they become actually more stable and stronger. But that's usually in combination with a small crown. So on trees like this, it's important that you prune them and don't let them get too tall, so that again that you get this sort of leverage effect on the hollow trunk lower down, and then you can get catastrophic failure going on. Next slide, please, Steve. So this is a rather grey day just before Christmas, and I wanted to try with Helen and a few others to try and give an example of a kind of lapsed Blenheim orange apple tree. And this is the tree before we started doing some restoration pruning. Next slide, please, Steve. And you can see that's it afterwards. It's had about 20% of the crown removed. Very good, Steve. Steve's got a career in TV coming up next, I can see. So 20% of the branches removed. That's sort of rubbing and crossing branches, as mentioned earlier. That's also retaining branches that are 45 degrees. the angle, taking out large leaders, shortening elongated side branches, and those are your core principles. Okay, next, Steve. I should say also cutting out canker. That's the one thing that we do try and cut out. You can see the tree on the left here. It's had its middle cut out, and this is the one that I was talking about earlier, saying about water shoots. All those shoots in the middle there, profusion of lots of thin shoots, many of them unproductive. But that's because the middle has been hollowed out of that tree and sort of a goblet shape. So you'd want to take out ideally 70% of those water shoots, favouring the ones that come off the mother branches at around about 45 degrees, and also favouring ones where if you do see any fruit buds on them as well. You can see the apple on the right there. Where the fruit is are the kind of lateral branches, but you can see the branches without any fruit, the tall thins one. That exactly, Steve. Thank you. That's what I would target to remove first if I was going to prune that tree. Take out those strong leaders, opening up the centre of the crown. But again, and the same with the water shoots. Not taking. If you're taking out 70% of the water shoots, you still don't want to take out more than 20% of the volume, and then come back and reassess, and then and carry out a further pruning. Based on how the tree is responding. And that could be, you could have gaps of anything from 3 to 5 years in between some of those, depending on the vitality of the tree. Okay, next slide, please, Steve. So this is the last slide. And a friend of mine in Norfolk asked me to come and do some work to this tree. It's had a really hard life. It's a pear. It's actually taken in the spring, and so that what looks those twiggy dead branches at the top aren't dead. They still haven't broken into leaf quite. It's in the back of a pub, yard, garden, busy. It's been heavily compacted from people walking on it, and it's also had, you can see it's a patio going in there and things like that. And also it's had gazillions of dogs peeing around the base of it. So it's had a hard life. The top had died, and obviously in this situation where lots of people are passing under it, we had to kind of stabilize the crown. So this wasn't any kind of restoration pruning other than stabilizing the crown, retaining. You can see there's dead stubs in there. We've left the stubs for wildlife and biodiversity, and really what we did to this tree was just really crown stabilization pruning. Now, pears can be really, really long-lived, and they can get very large. So sometimes this is one of the few trees in the fruit world that, in my experience, that you can prune more like a traditional crown reduction in this case. But as we said earlier, you've got to look at each tree based on its own merit, based on its own vitality. And that's about it from me. Thank you. Handing over to Helen.
Okay, so we're running over time a little bit, so I'll try and keep this as brief as possible, but we just wanted to summarise some of the information that you've been given over the last hour or so. So I think hopefully we've had lots of messages about assessing your orchard and your tree to decide what to do, looking at the land around it and what's happening around it, whether you actually need to do anything, maybe doing nothing is fine, and then staging the pruning over a period of years. Next slide, please. Then in terms of doing the actual pruning, removing congested branches and anything that's end-loaded, trying to keep horizontal branches and pruning back the verticals, horizontal branches being the ones that are actually going to be producing the fruit in the future. I think people have highlighted very well keeping decaying wood and not removing dead wood unless it's diseased, and not removing more than 20% of the canopy each time, and that's 20% of the live canopy. Obviously keeping the dead woods as well, and then thinking about the size of your cuts and how they're healing up. And then I think we've had several, both Simeon and Reg have talked about water shoots and keeping those that you want for future branches, but taking out roughly 70%. Next slide, please, Steve. So just to sum up in the whole of the webinar, really, what we're looking at is no avoidable loss of veteran fruit trees or traditional orchards. And like Reg, I would say that a lot of our fruit trees are ancient. They're old for their species, and we've got quite a lot of variety, difference for different varieties as well as to how big the trees will get. But thinking about anything that's got any decaying features in is going to be important, but I'm sure some of our trees are definitely ancient. Thinking also about the land around the trees and not just concentrating on the tree itself. Thinking about keeping dead trees for biodiversity, but then also thinking about the future and replacing trees when the numbers are getting low in the orchard, when you've got gaps, when trees have died, and then making sure that we've got some sort of continuity of habitat and of tree varieties in the orchard going into the future. We've written management plan, and I think Simeon sort of highlighted producing a management plan. But if you've got a small orchard with not many trees, that doesn't need to be a very fancy management plan. It's just going through the process of assessing your orchard and your trees, thinking about what you want from the orchard, and making sure that your management is actually heading in the right direction. I think also finally, just don't forget, small trees are not necessarily unimportant trees, and I think that's particularly the case with fruit trees. It's very easy to overlook some of the small ones just because you think they're not terribly exciting, but they actually can be very important from a cultural perspective as well as from a biodiversity perspective. And here on the last slide, we've just put up a range of different resources for you to access. The video that Reg was talking about with Orchard Bob is actually on the Vet Cert pages, but you can also access that from the ATF pages as well. And we're looking at producing a new leaflet about the management of veteran fruit trees, which we started some years ago and has halted a bit, but we need to kickstart that and get it finished. So thank you all very much for listening, and I'll hand back over to John to see if he can field some questions.
Wow, that was fantastic. That was really, really great. Well done, everybody. Brilliant job. We've got just under 700 people still watching after an hour and 15 minutes. So that pretty much speaks for itself. Okay, we've had just so many questions. I did say in the chat, we're not going to be able to get through them all. We'll just rattle through a few. Valerie asks, what time of year is best to prune your fruit trees?
Maybe Simeon, that's a good one for you.
Okay, yeah, I think we can probably all do that one. But yeah, but basically, so apples, pears, you want to do in dormant season in the winter, stone fruit in the summer to help minimise the effect of silverleaf.
Can I just interject there as well? We do summer pruning. This is where we sort out the water shoots that we talked about earlier, the young growth. And when you cut in winter, the saying goes, you cut in winter for wood and in summer for fruit. This is following the life cycle of the yearly cycle of the tree. So when you cut the tree in winter, it stimulates growth later on when the tree comes alive and the sap starts flowing. And then round about the end of July, you can start doing other cuts, and then branches won't come back. Those water shoots won't come back. So, yeah, it's 2 years. And as you said, Simeon, never touch stone fruit in winter. Always do that in the summer months, late spring, summer.
Brilliant.
Can I just jump?
Go on.
Can I just jump straight in and just answer questions as I see them? Yeah, I think we'll try and get through as many as we can. I mentioned the carbon sink, and someone asked something about it. So as a tree grows, obviously it keeps on taking carbon in, and as bits of it fall off, they go into the ground and they stay in the ground. So over the years, more and more carbon is taken into the soils, and if an orchard is removed and the soils are ploughed, all of that carbon is released all at once. So it does continue to build carbon throughout its lifetime.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We're doing a book question later on, but I have to ask an extra book question from Steve Cutmore, who I believe, Steve, it is your birthday, and what better way to spend your birthday than with the Arb Association Wednesday webinar. Steve asks, are there any books you recommend regarding managing veteran fruit trees? If that's one of your books for the end, don't say it now, but what book would, I don't know, one of you recommend as being great for our audience to look at? If you don't know, we're going to write one.
It's quite funny, really, because I carry an RHS book. I don't want to upset any RHS people, but I do carry an RHS book, and with all those little red marks that tell you where to cut a tree, it's almost impossible. By the time you get halfway around the tree, you've got to start again. And of course, if you're up a ladder, it's very hard to carry one of them massive books up there with you. So I'm sure there are books out there, but I don't know of any offhand.
This is a good book.
Oh, there you go.
Don't know how well it deals with veterans, but it's a really good place to start. It's ancient.
Bush, perfect author's name. But what I would say is some of the Natural England technical advice guides as well. They're really good, and there's a whole breakdown of all different orchard management, and there are ones on restorative pruning as well. So that's a good one. Oh, in fact, there we go. There's one there.
Helen, turn off your blurring.
Or just read it out, Helen.
Yeah, so it's the Natural England Technical Information Note TIN 018, and it's Traditional Orchards, Restoring and Managing Mature and Neglected Orchards, which I think is downloadable from the web pages.
Marvellous. Thank you all. Raymond Bush. I think that was the name of the man I bought this suit from. So a few people have been interested in hedgehogging. Ivor has said, if it's hedgehogged, what can you do to recover the shape and the health? Joe's asked something very similar. And poor old Kenji's asked, what do you do if your entire orchard is made of hedgehog trees?
You got a whole load of work ahead of you. Basically, essentially restructuring, that's essentially all you can do. So that's where you're selecting out certain kind of like leaders to then become the future framework again. And essentially kind of, that's how I would approach it, is just kind of you're starting from scratch again almost and restructuring that canopy. I don't know if Martin wants to say anything else or Reg.
Yeah, so I was doing some today actually. I think one of the problems is that a lot of people talk about cutting branches back to sort of 5 bud, and what happens then, you get two branches come up, and then you do it again the next year, you get 4, and so on and so forth, and then you get these thick growths, branches upright with lots of little bits coming off it. And what I tend to do is choose a position to take it back to, and then start cutting every other one out to sort of try and get it back to some kind of shape. Yeah, that's what I do.
I think one of the key things is, if we keep kind of coming back to work with your tree and just see how it responds and get to know it. It really as an individual. It sounds a bit funny, but that's really important. And just and work with how it's responding to your work.
And also, just as an afterthought, with these water shoots you get, you can actually tie branches down, or you can peg a weight on. When we used to work commercially, we used to carry a bag with pegs in with lead weights on, and we used to tie them. We just hook them on the end of the branch, and the sort of the sap will act as a memory foam. And when you take that off in late summer, it will stay there. It will stay in that position that you've set it. It works really well, tying and adding weights.
Brilliant, thank you. So on that subject, Ian's asked, what is the tree signalling by producing water shoots? It seems odd that the tree commits resource to these rapidly growing water shoots if they're unproductive and do not serve any biological function. Why is the tree doing it?
Well, it reacts to the cuts it's done. In commercial terms, as with the fruit, we put a tree under stress. Obviously, we don't want to do that with these veteran trees, but any cut that you make will have a reaction somewhere in the tree. Any live cut you make will have a reaction somewhere in the tree. It's just a natural thing. The sap has got to go somewhere. And if you cut the branch down or you cut a big branch off, the reaction for that tree is the sap will start to push branches out. And it's a good thing. And that's why we cut in winter for wood. So we want to cut in winter for the new growth that comes, so we can formulate the tree better, get the branches to come down, to be laterals, so it's easier to pick. But it's just a natural thing. The tree's got nowhere else to send its sap, so it pushes out new stuff. It's tried and tested. It's brilliant, really. The tree, you work with the tree, and it's good.
I describe it as if you take the volume of tree away in the winter, when all the sap is stored in the roots and down in the trunk, it's got all of this spare energy to in the spring when it all rises and it's gone, oh, I've got nowhere to go. So it grows vigorously to use up that energy. But if you take material away in the summer, you're taking away that energy at the same time, because all the sap is up in the leaves, all the energy is there, and so you're taking it away and you're not giving it that chance to say, I'm going to grow vigorously.
I think also it's a response to light as well, isn't it? You've opened up the center of the crown, and it's just got shed loads of sunlight getting to it, which boosts productivity.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Oh,
they're amazing fruit trees. Absolutely amazing.
They are amazing. You're speaking to the choir there, I think, Martin. Everybody's loving fruit trees today. Paul has said there was an old practice of putting iron nails into orchard trees for leaching iron. It's cheaper than stem injection. Is this still done? Iron nails in orchard trees?
Dear, oh dear.
No.
No.
I thought that might be the answer. I just thought it was quite interesting. Right, we got a law question. Everybody loves questions about the law from an anonymous attendee. Maybe it's someone who's recently broken the law. They say, please could you clarify, the pruning of fruit trees in conservation areas or under TPO protection is permitted if it complies with good horticultural practice, but removal of a fruit tree subject to those protections would have to follow the normal procedure of prior notification for proposed works. What exactly is the exemption around orchard trees in the TPO legislation?
You can prune them as you would a fruit tree without having to notify, because that is accepted as how you're going to manage a fruit tree. Where you wouldn't be able to go and cut limbs off of an oak tree with a TPO just because it's bashing against your window. You'd have to go and ask before you did that. But for fruit trees, we prune them anyway, so it's expected that it's going to be done. But removal is a very different thing. It's sort of like even sort of like a major good horticultural practice change would require you to ask the local planning authority before you did it. Does that clear that up?
That sounds good to me. Thank you. And I'll just a little follow-up. We like immediate feedback. Kenji of the Hedgehogged Orchard has said, thanks for the great advice. The orchard is going to be festooned with dangling bricks for a couple of years. So that is...
that's actually fantastic. What I would suggest that you do is you get some pebbles, you paint them yellow, and you get a yellow ribbon and you tie that round, you get your kids to do it, and you dangle them on. And that also then invites ladybirds who are attracted to yellow to your tree to eat your aphids. There you go.
Look at that. There's so much wisdom. I love it. Okay, that's good. Right, what have we got? Oh, a couple more. So Ruth has asked, is age as important to classifying a veteran fruit tree than its morphology? Can a relatively young, say 30-year tree, be classified as a veteran if it has the required characteristics? It's always a hot topic. How do you define a veteran or an ancient tree? But quite a few people have asked about it in the chat. Bearing in mind we've got about 3 minutes to go, and I don't think I'm going to let Reg speak. How do we classify a veteran fruit tree?
Can I crack on with this one? So veteran features can be identified, and just because a tree has a veteran feature, if you go along and say, look, it's got a rot hole here, right, that must be a veteran tree. Well, you would just undermine the whole concept of veteran trees. So you have to call a spade a spade. If it's actually only a 30-year-old tree, just because it's got a woodpecker roll in it, doesn't make it a veteran tree. So if you're trying to, when this is important is when it's being defined in terms of planning. And if you go along and say, look at this veteran tree because there's a branch missing, right, you just get laughed out of the orchard. So it's basically a bit of common sense, I think.
I think there's a whole minefield about ancient and veteran, and I know that there's lots and lots of discussion going on here. I think, yes, it's, I mean, just does one small hole make a veteran tree? But a lot of these trees actually have significant amounts of hollowing in them that you can't always see. A lot of them have got a mixture of different veteran tree features. They've maybe got hollows down one side, they've got sap runs. So obviously the more features a tree has, the more important it's going to be. But actually where you draw that line between where it's veteran and where it isn't veteran is a complete minefield. And I think where I would head is always on the side of caution, that if you've got several trees in an orchard that have got holes in them or bits of dead wood on them, then they are going to be valuable for biodiversity, even if they're not a really big stonking ancient tree with massive girth. And I think that's one of the problems where a lot of these fruit trees get overlooked, because they are small, they don't look that exciting. A lot of people look at them and think that they're looking all a bit wizened, but actually they've still got important habitat features in them. And actually a lot of these older trees also actually have tremendous heritage value in terms of being interesting varieties. So I think with fruit trees you've got those two sides to the coin as well, because you've got the sort of perhaps a slightly higher heritage value as well. I think it's all valuable.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a question here from Owen. Not all fruit trees are grafted. Some regions used pitchers to propagate trees, essentially cuttings. Is this significantly different from an ecological perspective than grafting? And I know that Steve's got something to come in on that with.
Yeah, I read that one. And I'd say that essentially there's not an enormous difference, although the vigor of the tree is going to be determined purely by the vigor of the cultivar. There won't be a rootstock to change the vigor. And some cultivars, Lane's Prince Albert, for example, barely wants to survive. It's like it barely grows, you have to really cajole it. Whereas others will, on their own roots, will make enormous trees like Blenheim Orange and Bramleys. I think there's some people have said, in particular, that the fruit will be more true to type if they're on their own rootstocks, which is what the pitchers are going to be. And you can also use pitchers as rootstocks, so you can graft onto them, because it's a nice quick way of getting some fruit trees to graft to. But essentially, in terms of ecology, I don't think there's going to be an enormous difference, apart from they will be a native, a normal, a vigorous tree, generally speaking.
Steve, could you just explain what a pitcher is, please?
Oh yes, a pitcher is when you take a cutting and it will take. I should have said that. It will root from its own, like many plants. You can take cutting and stick it in the ground and it will root. Most apples and pears won't root from a cutting. There's only a handful that do. Some of them, sometimes they're called. Oh God, someone remind me what are they called? Burnots. And they're actually more common in Wales and Ireland. There's quite a lot of them.
Okay, now I'm at the risk of causing absolute carnage. Has anybody seen a question that they particularly want to answer that I haven't asked? And I'm going to give like about 5 seconds and see if anyone shouts first. No? Okay. That's fine. Well, like I say, we'll send all of our questions to the presenters. I was going to ask, John from Stonehouse asks, which county has the best fruit trees and why is it Gloucestershire? But we haven't got time to cover that. So let's move on to a very, very important question. And I'm going to go in order of the people I can see. What is your favourite tree-related book? Steve, you're on screen for me at the moment. Go for it.
It can only be, let's try to get that, the National Apple Register of the United Kingdom, all 6,000 names of all of the varieties, all put into one place by one Muriel Smith. And this book is just a little bit older than me. And it's fantastic. It's like proper nerd reading. I love it. It's always there. It's always within reach.
I had a feeling we might have some books picked tonight that we've not had before, and you've just delivered early doors there. So great choice, Steve. Thank you very much. Reg.
Yeah, I'm going to go for mainly, it's not fruit related, but everything is related to this. It's fungi related. So Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. And the reason being is I went to see him in Bury St Edmunds last week, where he played the film, narrated by Björk, and I just think, fungi is life, life is fungi, we can't live without it. So it's a really, really important, and it's obviously a major thing in hollowing in old trees. So that's me.
Marvellous. There speaks a man who's just spent a week with Ted Green. Jeff.
Oh, I go with Orchard, A Year in England's Eden by Benedict MacDonald. It's just a very accessible way of reading about orchards and their wildlife value. Really, really, very accessible.
Fantastic. See, we're getting lots of new ones today. Simeon.
So mine's actually quite a recent book. I think it was published in the last couple of years. It's The Lost Orchards, Rediscovering the Forgotten Cider Apples of Dorset by Liz Copas and Nick Poole. It's a really, really fantastic book with highlighting a number of new and old apple varieties rediscovered, but the history of where apples came from. And she even starts the debate of where was cider first made. And that just kicks off such a discussion. So, yeah, that's a really great one.
In Gloucestershire.
Dorset, actually.
That's what we've got time for tonight.
What about my book?
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll come to you, but I'm just hurt by that. It's not Dorset, it's definitely Gloucestershire. Martin, what's your book?
My book is a series of books by the Gloucestershire Orchard Trust, the Pomona, with Charles Martell, him and Stinky Bishop, and Jim Chapman on orchards and other stuff, which tells you that champagne, how you make champagne was invented in Winchcombe, not in France, in cider making. That's one good thing, worth getting. Orchards and other industries.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And finishing off, a very eclectic selection of books. Helen, you're last up, I think.
Yeah, mine is one that I'm sure you've had before, but I think it's got to be David Lonsdale's Ancient and Other Veteran Trees, Further Guidance on Management, since we no longer have David, to have his resource available that we can dip into, and I do regularly dip into it for pearls of wisdom. So, yeah, that would be mine. Thank you.
Absolutely, a masterpiece by the wonderful David Lonsdale. Fantastic. Look, thank you all of our speakers so much. That really was brilliant. What a wonderful way to end the series. They're all clicking their emojis. Look, they love a bit of this now. So they're all showing you how much they love it. Thank you all. That was great. Thank you to all of you watching. Thanks to all of our speakers throughout the whole series. Look at them go. Look at them go with their busy little fingers. Yes, well done, everybody. Thank you. You're all great. Everyone watching. Thanks to Andrew for all your work throughout the series and the rest of the team. We will see you probably like October, maybe. We'll see what we can do, but we're putting together a webinar series for you right now that will hopefully be as equally brilliant as this one was. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful, I don't know, rest of the year until October, whatever it is. Take care of yourselves. Hopefully see you at ARB show or conference or something like that. And thank you for joining us. Good night.